imagine you're just, sitting at your desk, going about your normal day, and suddenly you smell burning rubber.
Right.
But there's no fire anywhere. There are no cars around. Or maybe your thumb just starts to tingle.
Yeah, just a random tingle.
Exactly. And over the next 30 seconds or so, that tingle sort of creeps up your arm into your shoulder until like half your face is physically twitching.
I mean, most people would never look at either of those scenarios and think, oh, that is a seizure.
Right, because we've been culturally conditioned to look for one very specific, dramatic presentation.
Yeah, the generalized tonic-clonic seizure. That's the sudden loss of consciousness, followed by the stiffening, the tonic phase, and then the rhythmic shaking, which is the clonic phase. It's what they show in the movies.
It's what we're all taught in first aid classes. But today, we're actually tearing down that really narrow preconception.
We really are.
Welcome to our deep dive into the modern understanding of epilepsy. We have this fascinating stack of medical literature we're using today. Specifically, a 2025 review from Continuum breaking down, how the condition is classified and diagnosed now.
And we've also got a highly detailed report from Epilepsia that focuses entirely on genetic generalized epilepsies.
Yeah, so our mission today is really to give you, the listener, a crystal clear look at what epilepsy actually is beneath the surface, how the medical field maps it out today, and the incredibly complex genetics pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Because the medical understanding has shifted so profoundly, even just over the last 10 years or so.
Oh, absolutely.
We're moving away from defining it solely by that outward physical convulsion. Now we're looking much closer to the underlying electrical storm in the brain itself.
And that shift really comes through in the official definition of the word itself. I was reading the International League Against Epilepsy, the ILAE, their 2014 practical definition, and it completely reframes how you might think about the diagnosis.
It really does. Because it used to be that a doctor had to see at least 2 unprovoked seizures separated by a day to call it epilepsy.
Right, but the update brings in this whole predictive element. A person can actually be diagnosed after just one single unprovoked seizure.
Which I know can sound alarming at first glance. Like, why rush the label, right?
Exactly. Why not wait and see?
Well, the change was made because if a doctor runs an EEG, an electroencephalogram, which is basically that cap of wires that measures brain waves, or if they take a scan of your brain tissue and find a really clear abnormality, they aren't going to just wait around for lightning to strike twice.
Right. They already see the storm clouds.
Exactly. If the tests show a 60% or higher likelihood of another seizure happening over the next decade, the diagnosis is made right then. They're treating the underlying predisposition, not just the event.
Which pushes the timeline for treatment up so much. But there was another piece of that definition that just, it felt incredibly important.
The resolution aspect.
Yes. The concept of it being resolved. Because epilepsy doesn't have to be this permanent, lifelong brand.
Yeah, the psychological weight of the word epilepsy is really heavy. So this distinction matters a lot.
It's huge.
If a patient goes 10 years without a single seizure, and they haven't needed any anti-seizure medications for the last 5 of those years, their epilepsy is officially considered resolved.
Like they've effectively outgrown it, or just overcome that lowered seizure threshold.
Exactly. But to get a patient to that resolved state, a clinician first have to understand exactly what kind of electrical storm they're actually dealing with.
Which requires a map.
It requires a very good map. And that naturally brings us to the 2017 ILAE classification framework. It's essentially the modern blueprint for diagnosing the condition.
Yeah, and it relies on this really strict 3-tiered system, right?
Right. It forces a clinician to be highly methodical. You build a diagnosis from the ground up.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when I was reading it, I found myself comparing this to like how you might sort a massive music library.
Oh, I like that.
So, tier 1, you start by looking at the individual track playing right now. That is your seizure type.
Yes, you need to figure out if it's a focal seizure, meaning the abnormal electrical firing starts in one specific localized network of the brain, or a generalized seizure where the storm engages the whole brain network simultaneously.
Right. And then once you know the track, you try to figure out the broader album or the genre. That's tier 2, the epilepsy type.
Exactly. So by looking at all the different seizures a patient has had, their EEG readings, their medical history, the doctor determines that this person has a focal epilepsy, a generalized epilepsy, or sometimes a combined type.
And finally, tier 3. If you're lucky and have enough info, you figure out the specific artist's era, the epilepsy syndrome.
Which would be a highly specific diagnosis like childhood absence epilepsy or Dravet syndrome. factoring in the age the seizure started, very specific EEG patterns, and known triggers.
Reaching that third tier is the ultimate goal, right? Because it dictates the best treatment.
It is the ultimate goal. But, what's fascinating here is that this framework is designed to work even when you don't have all that data.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. It sounds perfect if you're in some cutting-edge neurology ward with, high-res MRI machines and 5-day video EEG monitoring.
Right.
But millions of people live in lower-income countries or rural areas where those tools just don't exist.
And that is exactly why the 2017 blueprint is so brilliant globally. The architects specifically designed it to be flexible.
So it works without the fancy tech?
Yes. A doctor in a rural clinic might only have access to a basic CT scan, plus whatever story the patient's family tells them. But even with just observable symptoms and clinical history, that doctor can still accurately identify the seizure type and the broad epilepsy type.
So everyone is speaking the same diagnostic language.
Exactly, whether they're in a multi-million-dollar imaging suite or just doing a simple patient interview.
Okay, so since everything rests on that first tier, identifying the seizure type, we really need to talk about what the body actually does during these events.
The semiology.
Right, semiology, the study of signs and symptoms. It's basically diagnostic detective work.
It is, because the outward behaviors a patient exhibits during a seizure are direct physical clues to where the misfiring is happening inside the brain tissue.
We mentioned focal versus generalized. And generalized is the whole brain, full body convulsions. But the focal seizures get incredibly strange.
They get very specific, yeah. The clinical guidelines categorize them first by awareness. Like, is the patient fully aware of what is happening, or is their awareness impaired?
Right. And from there, it splits into motor and non-motor symptoms. And the motor symptoms in focal seizures go way beyond just like thrashing or shaking.
Oh, absolutely. We frequently see these phenomena called automatisms.
Automatisms. So imagine you're talking to a colleague and suddenly they just stop responding. They seem awake, their eyes are open, but they just start smacking their lips repeatedly.
Or making repetitive hand motions.
Yeah, like robotic hand-picking motions, like they're plucking invisible lint off their shirt.
Those are automatisms. The person has no control over them and usually no memory of doing them afterward.
Wow. And then the non-motor symptoms can be even more subtle, right?
Much more subtle. A person might experience a sudden behavioral arrest, literally just freezing mid-action. Or they might experience ictal aphasia.
Ictal meaning during the seizure.
Right, so during the seizure, they are fully conscious, but they find themselves entirely unable to process or produce language.
That sounds terrifying. And then there are the emotional and sensory auras too, like a sudden wave of intense dread out of nowhere, or that burning rubber smell we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Those are all non-motor focal seizures.
Which brings up something I really wanted to ask you about. The Jacksonian march.
Ah, yes.
Going back to that tingling thumb that turns into a convulsing arm and then a twitching face over the span of a minute. Is that multiple seizures triggering one after another? Or how does a doctor even know where to look?
It looks like multiple seizures, but it's actually one single evolving event. The electrical storm is literally marching across the motor cortex of the brain.
Okay.
So the physical symptoms spread up the arm as the electricity spreads across the corresponding map of the body in the brain tissue.
Oh, wow.
But for a neurologist, while observing this march is useful, the absolute most critical piece of data is the very first noticeable sign.
The initial classifier.
Exactly. That initial tingling of the thumb points to the exact ground zero of the seizure, the epileptogenic zone, before the storm spreads to neighboring areas.
The sources actually highlight a perfect case study for this. The 41-year-old man.
Right, the guy who comes in reporting seizures that always begin the exact same way.
Yeah, he feels, quote, knots in his stomach and a rising sensation in his abdomen. That's his non-motor aura.
And immediately following that rising sensation, his awareness becomes impaired. He begins lip smacking and fumbling with his hands, those oral and manual automatisms we just talked about.
So a doctor listening to that sequence, epigastric rising sensation, followed by lip smacking, they already have a map forming in their head.
Oh, totally. That specific sequence is a textbook presentation pointing directly to the mesial temporal lobe of the brain.
And when they ran the EEG and MRI on this patient, they found exactly what the symptoms predicted, right?
Yep, a tiny area of scarring on his left hippocampus, which is the brain's memory center.
That is incredible. The physical behaviors basically drew a neon sign pointing to the exact millimeter of damaged tissue.
It's pure localization. But once you figure out where the seizure is starting, the next logical question is why? Why is the brain misfiring in the first place?
Right. What broke the wiring? And this leads us to the etiologies, the underlying causes.
The classification framework groups these into 6 distinct categories: structural, genetic, infectious, metabolic, immune, and unknown.
Okay, so structural covers the physical damage we just talked about, like a scar on the hippocampus, or maybe a tumor or a stroke a baby suffered around birth that permanently altered the tissue.
Exactly. But on a global scale, the infectious category is a massive driver of epilepsy.
Right. The sources mention viral encephalitis, which is an infection of the brain itself,
Yeah.
or a neurocystis.
Yeah, a parasitic infection that is heavily prevalent in certain parts of the world.
And the literature makes this very careful distinction here between an acute symptomatic seizure and actual epilepsy when dealing with infections.
That's a crucial distinction.
So an acute symptomatic seizure during an active brain infection is like, well, it's like a fire alarm going off because there's actual smoke in the room right now.
That's a great way to put it. The seizure is provoked by the immediate crisis.
But epilepsy is when the infection damages the wiring, so the alarm keeps tripping randomly long after the fire is out.
That is exactly right. Even after the active infection is completely cured, the structural legacy of the infection leaves a permanent vulnerability.
Wow.
In fact, the data shows that experiencing acute symptomatic seizures during a bout of viral encephalitis increases your likelihood of developing long-term, unprovoked epilepsy by 22-fold.
Wait, 22-fold. That is staggering.
It really highlights how delicate the brain's electrical networks are.
It does. I also noticed the immune category is increasingly taking center stage in recent research, too.
It's a rapidly expanding frontier. We're learning that the body's own immune system can actually turn on the brain, creating conditions like NMDA receptor encephalitis.
Right, and I wanted to understand the mechanism here. How does an immune system mistake trigger an electrical storm?
Well, you have to picture what a receptor actually does. NMDA receptors are like tiny chemical gateways on the surface of your brain cells. They open and close to regulate the flow of electrical signals.
Okay.
In this specific type of encephalitis, your immune system gets confused. It starts producing antibodies that physically attack and block those exact gateways.
So the gates are jammed shut.
Yes. And without functioning gateways to regulate the voltage, the cells can't control their firing. They become hyperexcitable.
Which means standard anti-seizure medications won't do much good, right? Because they're just trying to calm the electricity while the immune system is actively destroying the braking system.
Exactly. The treatment has to be early, aggressive immunotherapy to stop the antibodies themselves. Identifying the mechanism completely dictates the treatment.
That makes total sense.
And this is why the genetic category is simultaneously the most important and the most complex piece of the puzzle, particularly when we focus on genetic generalized epilepsies, or GGEs.
Because GGEs account for a full 25% of all epilepsy cases. That's a huge chunk.
A quarter of all cases.
But the deep dive into the genetics behind them is just full of these apparent contradictions. I mean, normally when you hear a disease is genetic, you assume a straightforward inheritance. Your parent has it, they pass the gene to you, you have it.
Right, the simple family tree. But GGEs do not play by those simple rules, and the proof of their complexity really comes from twin studies.
Okay, let's talk about the twins.
So researchers look at the concordance rate. Basically, if one twin has a GGE, what's the mathematical probability the other twin has it?
Right.
For fraternal twins, who share roughly half of their DNA, just like regular siblings, the concordance rate is 33%.
Okay.
But for identical twins, who share all of their DNA, that rate jumps to 76%.
Okay, let me pause there because this is where the text initially confused me.
Sure.
If identical twins have a 76% concordance rate, the condition is undeniably heavily driven by genetics. But then the text goes on to say that for regular siblings of a patient with GGE, their rate of developing epilepsy is only about 8%.
Yeah, it's a huge drop.
If it's genetic and siblings share half their DNA, shouldn't their risk be much higher, like closer to 50%?
As we connect this to the bigger picture, it seems like a mathematical error until you factor in polygenic inheritance. GVEs are rarely caused by a single broken gene that you can just trace up a family line.
So it isn't a single switch being flipped.
No, it requires a complex, perfect storm of multiple gene variants coming together. Individually, none of those variants cause seizures.
So it's more like a combination lock.
Exactly. Your mother might carry 3 variants, your father might carry 4, and they're completely healthy. But if you happen to inherit all of them, they cross a threshold.
You inherit the perfect storm from a completely blank family history.
Right. No one in your family has ever had a seizure, but you got the exact combination necessary to trigger a genetic generalized epilepsy.
Which perfectly explains the 8% sibling rate. The full combination is just incredibly hard to pass down intact.
Exactly. The family histories for GGE are often completely blank.
But there are exceptions to this polygenic rule, right? And these rare single gene exceptions are completely changing how we treat the disease.
They really are. While most GGEs are a complex soup of variants, we have identified rare mutations that directly cause the disease. The quintessential example in the literature is GLUT1 deficiency.
Right. Caused by a mutation in a single gene called SLC2A1.
Yes, and the mechanics of this mutation are just fascinating.
The SLC2A1 gene essentially provides the blueprints for building a very specific doorway in the blood-brain barrier, right?
Exactly. And this doorway's only job is to allow glucose sugar to pass from the bloodstream into the brain tissue.
And the brain is an absolute energy hog. It relies almost exclusively on glucose for fuel.
So in a patient with GLUT1 deficiency, that single gene is mutated, which means the glucose doorway is physically broken. The sugar in the blood literally cannot get into the brain.
The brain is starving.
It is entirely starved of energy.
And this severe energy crisis results in early onset absence epilepsy, where toddlers are having constant staring spells, but it's also combined with highly unusual movement disorders.
Like paroxysmal exertional dyskinesia.
Right, if these kids try to run around or play sports, they develop severe cramps and involuntary jerking in their limbs.
Because their brain networks simply run out of fuel to control motor function during physical exertion.
Wait, so if the brain's glucose doorway is literally broken by this mutation, how do you fix a starving brain? You can't just give them more sugar.
No, it'll just bounce off the blood-brain barrier.
So what do?
You introduce an entirely different fuel source. This is one of the most brilliant workarounds we have in medicine. The patient is placed on a strict ketogenic diet.
Okay, not the trendy weight loss version of keto, obviously.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
A rigorous, medically supervised neurological treatment. When you put a patient on a ketogenic diet, you starve the body of carbohydrates and force the liver to burn fat, which produces molecules called ketones.
And ketones are an alternative brain fuel.
Yes. And most importantly, ketones do not use the broken glucose doorway. They have their own completely separate transporter to cross the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, wow. You essentially bypass the broken genetic mechanism entirely by using the back door.
You provide a completely different fuel line. The ketones flood into the brain, the starvation ends, the seizures stop, and cognitive function frequently improves.
That is precision medicine at its finest. Find the broken mechanism, engineer a biological bypass.
It's incredible. And the literature also notes another fascinating genetic variation that operates a bit differently. Copy number variants, or CNVs.
Right. The specific one mentioned was the 15q13.3 microdeletion. This is where an entire chunk of DNA is just missing from a chromosome.
And we have to ask why a missing chunk of DNA causes the brain to misfire.
Well, that specific deleted section contains blueprints for proteins that help build the brain's inhibitory networks, right? Like the electrical brakes.
Exactly. And without enough brakes, the entire system is prone to runaway electrical firing.
But the tricky part about CNVs is that they are risk alleles. Having the microdeletion doesn't guarantee you will get epilepsy.
Right. A person could carry this missing chunk of DNA and go their entire life without a single neurological issue.
But if you do have it, it raises your risk exponentially. Not just for epilepsy, but for a whole spectrum of conditions like autism and schizophrenia.
It's like rolling a heavily weighted die, which makes genetic counseling incredibly difficult. You aren't predicting a certain future, you're explaining a probability matrix.
Yeah, that really brings all this dense science back to the human element. Just put yourself in the clinic waiting room described at the beginning of the epilepsy report.
Oh, the two parents.
Yeah, you have two different parents waiting to speak to the genetic counselor, both asking, will my next child inherit this?
And based on everything we've unpacked today, their answers are going to be entirely different.
Let's look at the first parent. A mother who has managed typical genetic generalized epilepsy since her teenage years. She has absent seizures and the occasional convulsion.
Well, because typical GGE is that polygenic combination locked the perfect storm. The counselor will tell her that the risk to her child is only around 8%.
So mostly likely fine, and there's no genetic test that can predict it anyway.
Exactly. But then you have the second parent in the waiting room. A father whose 6-year-old daughter has been having relentless absent seizures since she was 3.
And that early onset, before age 4, is a massive diagnostic clue.
It is. And during the interview, The father casually brings up that whenever he plays sports, he gets severe, prolonged leg cramps and involuntary jerking.
Clue number 2.
The paroxysmal exertional dyskinesia.
Right. The genetic counselor hears that, and the puzzle pieces just snap together. This isn't a polygenic storm. This is GLUT1 deficiency.
The father has the SLC2A1 mutation, and because this specific mutation is an autosomal dominant trait, meaning you only need one copy of the mutated gene to manifest the condition, any future children he has carry a 50% chance of inheriting it.
The probability is much higher, but the silver lining is profound.
Because they mapped the exact broken doorway, they have a direct path to a highly effective treatment.
Exactly. They can start his daughter on the ketogenic diet immediately, bypass the broken transporter, and heal her starving brain. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means precision medicine is finally coming to epilepsy. We're witnessing a monumental shift, transforming it from this mysterious affliction into a manageable, highly categorized condition.
But the map is still being drawn. Despite all the sophisticated classifications, the advanced EEGs, and the genetic twin studies, roughly 1/3 of all epilepsy cases globally are still categorized as having an unknown etiology.
1/3. The root cause is still hiding in the dark.
It is. And with massive whole genome sequencing projects underway worldwide right now, we really have to wonder what is sitting in that unknown third. What hidden viral triggers, subtle immune connections, or brilliantly simple dietary workarounds are just waiting to be discovered in the next decade.
It's definitely something to keep your eyes on as the science rapidly evolves. The mystery is far from solved, but the tools are getting sharper every day. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.